I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. Today, we have a superstar in the field of lifestyle medicine. As a matter of fact, he is a past president of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, and he's written an amazing new book that we're going to talk about today called How to Eat. Please welcome Dr. David Katz. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Oh, I'm excited to be with you, Chef. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for what you do just in general on the front lines. I have been following you for years, even though we've never met, and you're just a wonderful human, and I appreciate so much what you do.
Thank you very much. I try to be a good human. That's job one.
Yeah, I think you are, and I love that you love animals. I love that you love your dogs, and I just love that you also love animals. So thank you for that as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
So Dr. Katz, we have such nutritional illiteracy in this country. Is that why we even need it doesn't make sense that humans actually would need a book with this title.
Totally agree. Yeah, in fact, Mark and I were doing just a couple of interviews. I mean, we had the misfortune of having our book come out just as the pandemic hit. America is focused on food all of the time, except when there is a viral pandemic. So we managed just a few interviews before everything fell apart, and we did one with the radio station, and I think the closing question to both of us was, so what would you say is the biggest news about diet? And Mark looked at me, and I looked at Mark, and then I said, okay, well, let me answer this one. The biggest news about diet is that there is no news about diet. I mean, America just can't deal with that. But the places around the world where people derive the greatest combination of pleasure and vitality from their food, and where their dietary patterns have the smallest environmental footprint and are the most sustainable, they eat the way their grandparents ate, who ate the way their grandparents ate. It's rooted in heritage and cultural traditions, and it's time honored. And nobody is waiting for a new book to come out, and nobody is tuning into the morning shows to find out the right way to eat this week. So you're absolutely right. I completely agree. We should not need books about diet and nutrition, because we should all know what's what, and we should all just accept it. But we don't. And so, I absolutely do fantasize about the day when you can't sell a fad diet book in America, and when, people don't need to buy books to know how to eat. And the other problem, AJ, is that, it's not just that we shouldn't need books at all, but the people who most need help are also the people generally least likely to buy a book, ours or any other, right? So as a public health physician, my whole career has been focused on communities of disadvantage and health disparities, and the people whose diets are the worst and who really need help so that they stop eating glow-in-the-dark Frankenfoods, so that junk is not the major food group in their diets. They're not buying books, and they're not watching videos. They're not tuning into podcasts either. I mean, there are huge health disparities in this country, and we have to overcome that with culture-wide interventions. Essentially, the whole food supply needs to be cleaned up, and so we've got a lot of work to do. But for now, since we have an awful lot of books about dietary nonsense, part of the remedy, at least in the short term, until we get to that better world, is to have books about dietary sense. And that's what Mark and I wrote. So we were committed to sorting out, what's true, what's not, what's reliable, what's not. And sadly, that is needed. And so we did the best we could to write a book that was very informational, but also a lot of fun. And I know you've read it, and so you can attest to this. We wrote it like a conversation. We basically said, we're at the coffee table, pull up a chair, join the conversation. And I think people do need it. They need to understand the science. I think they need a bracing dose of sense, because there's so much highly polarized opinion. And these days, a lot of, it's very easy for opinion to masquerade as expertise, even when it's not. So, yeah, for better or worse, a book to set the record straight did seem to be in order.
I really appreciate, I read it, and I did also listen to it on Audible, and I like that it is for the layperson, because some of the books that I read are beyond my pay grade, and I can't understand this, but the people that need this information, it is very well written and understandable. And without creating a spoiler alert, what do you think all the best diets have in common?
There are two key gradients, and as you probably know, this is something I've addressed very extensively. So I wrote a review article in Annual Review of Public Health in 2014. Can we say what diet is best for health? So a dense peer-reviewed paper on that very question. What do the best diets have in common? I'm currently working with a team on the 4th edition of my nutrition textbook for health professionals, nutrition and clinical practice. And then just before writing How to Eat with Mark Bittman, I wrote my magnum opus, my 750-page book, The Truth About Food, and wrestled with that. And so, Michael Pollan described it in 7 words: eat food, not too much, mostly plants. So the best diets have those 7 words in common. But I would say there are 2 key gradients. One is the gradient from ultra-processed food to completely unprocessed food. And we actually now have, as I'm sure you know, AJ, we have an operational definition of ultra-processed food. This is the work of Carlos Monteiro from Brazil and his colleagues, who helped us get past just talking about junk food as something when you see it, as actually having a scale of the degree of processing. And so the NOVA scale tells us what an ultra-processed food is. And at the other end of the scale is food direct from nature. The closer you get to a bunch of food in your diet direct from nature, the better. So that's one gradient. And the other gradient is the animal food to plant food gradient. And the more of your diet that's made up of plant foods, the better it is for you, the better it is to our fellow creatures, and the better that it is for the world. And if you put those 2 gradients together, less processed, more plants, you're moving in that direction that Pollan described: real food, mostly plants. That's what they all have in common. That's true of when you do paleo right, it meets those criteria. The Mediterranean diet done right meets those criteria. Flexitarian, pescatarian, DASH, Diabetes Prevention Program, MIND, Ornish, Esselstyn, whole food, plant-based, high fat, low fat, on and on it goes. The full spectrum of diets that could compete for best style laurels, they are variants on a common theme. And that theme is wholesome foods in balanced, sensible assemblies, plant predominant, minimally processed foods. It's pretty clear. And, if you focus on those simple fundamentals, you'll be fine. You could pick any fad du jour, gluten, lectins, this type of fat, that type of fat, carbohydrate thresholds, any micronutrient. You could pick any nutrient you want, any component of foods you want, and get your diet horribly wrong. But if you get your diet right, you tend to get all the components sorted out. So I definitely recommend focusing on foods and dietary pattern.
Right. Well, Diana says no one knows better than Dr. Katz, hands down. And I agree with you so much about processed food, Dr. Katz. 10 years ago, I wrote a book called Unprocessed. And even though I've been an ethical vegan for 43 years, my case was that even if you're going to eat animals, nobody needs to eat processed food. Yet this is what Americans seem to get most of their calories from.
Well, it's by design. So let's just, I completely agree with you, but let's just do a quick tangent and talk about Michael Moss. So Michael Moss is a Pulitzer Prize winning investigative journalist, wrote Salt, Sugar, Fat and Hooked. And from Salt, Sugar, Fat, there was an excerpt that was a New York Times Magazine cover story. And the title was The Extraordinary Science of Addictive Junk Food. You probably read it. Many people tuning in have read it. But let's repeat that title: The Extraordinary Science of Addictive Junk Food. Yeah, there's a science behind addictive junk food. Crazy. But, Mike, and by the way, Michael's not the first to tell this story. It was actually a 4-part expose in the Chicago Tribune 10 years earlier. I don't know that anybody but me read that one, but I sure did. It's like, wow, this is going to change the food supply in America. And it didn't. And I thought, okay, so Michael's telling the story again. This is going to change the food supply and food policy in America. And it didn't. So let me tell you what he describes. But before I do, let me ask you this. Where is the outrage? We've been told more than once in high profile venues that the food supply in America is willfully engineered to be addictive, among loving parents and grandparents. Where the heck is the outrage? So, essentially the story is every big food company has teams of PhDs with functional MRI machines. These are neuroscientists and experts in taste physiology and organic chemistry and food science. And it's their job to figure out what formulations, what combinations of flavors and textures makes food so hyper palatable and irresistible you can't stop eating it until your arm gets exhausted from lifting it to your mouth. Right. And then, we tell people eat unprocessed food, eat wholesome food, eat in moderation, but they're up against highly paid scientists who get a bonus if they can design food you can't resist and can't stop eating. That's just not fair. It's not reasonable. And in fact, when you think about what it really means, that we're mortgaging the future health of children in America to fatten corporate coffers, again, I ask, where is the outrage? And let me throw something else into the mix. So this is the work of Michael Moss. There was an op-ed in the New York Times, August 26th of 2019. Darish Mozaffarian, who's the Dean of Nutrition at Tufts, and Dan Glickman, former Secretary of Agriculture. The title of their op-ed was, "Our Food is Killing Too Many of Us." And they cite the primary literature indicating that poor diet quality is now the #1 cause of premature death in the United States, full stop. Even during the pandemic. And we decided before we went live, AJ, we wouldn't talk about the pandemic, but we can at least compare ourselves to the pandemic. So, yes, absolutely terrible, tragic, 135,000 or so lives lost to the pandemic to date in the United States, but poor diet quality in America, totally unnecessary, totally under our control. Poor diet quality kills 500,000 people prematurely every year. So far, that's 4 times worse than the toll of the pandemic, and it happens every year. And it doesn't just kill people. Poor diet quality causes type 2 diabetes and obesity, and it affects children as well as adults. So, this is why, although the advice is so simple, yes, we should eat unprocessed. And whether you're vegan or not vegan, we all know the expression, you are what you eat. By extension, what you eat is what it eats, right? So if you are going to eat animals, make sure that they had a healthy, sustaining lifestyle diet, that they were free to range, they were pasture raised and pasture fed and all of that, because they are what they eat. So your meat should not be processed either after the fact, processed into meat concoctions, but also during the life of the animal. The meat should not be processed with an adulterated diet. But, I'm with you. I favor, plant predominant to plant exclusive diets for many reasons. And it ought to be real food. But there's a reason that goes far beyond self-discipline or personal responsibility why it isn't. America truly does run on Dunkin' and on corporate profits. And we are perfectly willing in this country and in this culture to mortgage the future health of our children for the sake of corporate quarterly statements. And until there's a sufficient level of outrage among a nation of loving parents and grandparents to put a stop to it, that is the problem we face. It hides in plain sight.
Yeah. And the fact that processed food is easily available, readily affordable, socially acceptable doesn't make it makes it just that much easier for people to just eat it and enjoy it because everybody else is doing it.
Absolutely true. It makes me think of a story I told in a column many years ago. I was on a flight from somewhere to somewhere. I no longer remember where. And sitting not too far from me were a couple of women who were traveling with a child who was maybe 3 or 4. 2 women seemed absolutely lovely. They were friendly and sweet and kind, and I really enjoyed their company. But couldn't help but notice the fact that they were both severely obese, so much so that when one went to the restroom, the other joked, "Well, I hope you can fit through the door." So there was some banter between the 2 of them about that. And I was looking at this child, and the entire flight, they were giving this kid stuff that would not qualify as food for any species other than our own. If you gave any of this stuff to an animal in a zoo, you would be arrested for cruelty to animals. Glow in the dark cheese puffs and jelly beans. And, what hope does this child have of avoiding severe obesity and the likely consequences, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, early heart disease, and so forth. But they weren't doing anything wrong. Now, if two loving adults gave a child alcohol or tobacco or drugs, it's a crime. But junk food just registers as, breakfast in America. So, until our cultural standards evolve to the point where we all look at junk food and actually see the junk and not the food, and accept the fact that junk cannot be food and food cannot be junk, this will go on. And years ago at the Prevention Research Center, we developed a program called Nutrition Detectives. It's a food label literacy program for kids. And we made an interactive video. Back in those days, it was a DVD. It's now available online. We studied it. We showed that it was highly effective at cultivating food label literacy in kids and their parents. But in the video, I point out that, if you've got a child who's growing, is this tall this year and is expecting to be this tall next year, what is that additional bit of you going to be made out of? Where does it come from? You're here now. You're going to be here in a year or two. There's going to be this much more you. What's that going to be built out of? Food. Food is the construction material for the growing body of children and grandchildren we love. You just pause long enough to recognize that incontrovertible fact and ask yourself, so is junk an acceptable building material for the body and vital structures of a child you love? How did it ever come to this? Really is shocking. So it's amazing what you get used to. Familiarity breeds contempt. I don't see the outrage that this problem calls out for. And Mark obviously agrees. And, one of the things we channel in How to Eat is a bit of our shared outrage at what has happened to food in our culture.
Yeah, it's interesting, Dr. Katz, before the sheltering began, I would volunteer at the hospital once a week doing something called pet therapy. And in a hospital where people are sick, they forget about the cafeteria, the kind of food they have there, but there was a vending machine in the parking lot with like Red Bull and Cheetos and ice cream. Like, okay, well, who needs a vending machine in a parking lot? Like, you can't even walk to the hospital. And it's like, how can we ever help people when our hospitals are feeding them the same food that got them admitted in the first place?
And the problem has been so insidious. So until quite recently, the famous, and rightly famous Cleveland Clinic had a McDonald's in their lobby. They couldn't get rid of it because of the lease. I think the lease lapsed and they finally did manage to get rid of it. But friends and colleagues like Mike Roizen, who was their chief wellness officer, just trying to overcome this problem. But, basically McDonald's on the ground floor, coronary care, one flight up. Wow, that's a match made in heaven. Yeah, but again, this is the danger of complacency. This is the danger of apathy. This is the danger of familiarity. We are used to junk as a food group in this country, and so it does not evoke outrage. But again, let's remind people, the single leading cause of premature death in the United States before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and after the pandemic is poor diet quality. Not poor diet quality because you can't get enough food. There's that problem too in this country. No, I'm talking about poor diet quality for people who can get enough food because what they're eating isn't really food. It's junk masquerading as food, willfully engineered to be addictive for the sake of corporate profits at the expense of the health of your family. We need collective outrage, and we need a cultural revolution that says food is food and junk is junk, and never the twain shall meet, not on my watch, not in my house. And we could put an end to this. It's interesting. We do, I think, have an oh, woe is me problem, AJ, with regard to the food supply. The notion that it's a food supply. It is the food supply. What can we do? It's like the Himalayas. It's just a big thing that's out there that we can't do anything about. Nonsense. The single most effective means to change the food supply is to change the food demand. We've even seen it happen in our lifetimes at the height of the Atkins craze. So this was in the early aughts, 2002, thereabouts. At that time, low carb junk food had not yet been invented. But when tens of millions of people went on a low carb diet, the food industry said, hey, we've got an idea. I mean, right now they're giving up bread and pasta and eating meat. That's fine, but we can do better than that. We can invent low carb pasta, low carb bread, low carb brownies, a whole new variety of junk food we can sell them. And they did. But, although the results were unfortunate, what it demonstrated was how nimble the food supply is in response to food demand. Within about 6 to 12 weeks, every supermarket in America had a whole new inventory of low carb foods. And within just a few months, they had dozens and dozens and dozens of products, if not hundreds. And there was no legislation, no litigation, no sweeping policy reform, just a very popular diet and a change in demand. And the food supply jumped through hoops to satisfy the demand. So imagine if our demand were to change, not fixated on one nutrient or how much carbohydrate, but no, we will not eat ultra processed junk. We won't buy it. It's got to be real food. We want real food, minimally processed, short ingredient list. We want to recognize everything on an ingredient list as being actual food, and otherwise we won't buy it. You know how long it would take to get a complete transformation of food supply? Weeks, just weeks. So we have that power. I wish to heck we would wield it.
It's a very unpopular position, Dr. Katz. As an ethical vegan for 43 years, I was a junk food vegan for the first 26. And when I learned that that's the reason I weighed 200 pounds and had the beginning of colon cancer, I switched to a plant exclusive whole diet of just whole natural foods. And as a speaker, I find that
good for you, and how beautiful you look. I mean, your health just shines right out of you. So good for you.
Thank you. I just turned 60. So thank you very much. So I often get uninvited to not conferences so much, but to veg fests, because my stance on don't eat processed food, especially now. When I became vegan in 1977, which was the same year I matriculated to the University of Pennsylvania, and they also had a McDonald's in the lobby of the Children's Hospital, there was no vegan junk food. There wasn't even boxed plant milk. But now you can get, fake meat, fake everything that's junk. And when I speak out against vegan junk food, I'm bad. It's like I can't fit in any group because the vegans don't like me. There's a few groups, because I tell the truth about this. They say the Surgeon General said this generation of children won't outlive the parents. I think it's because this generation is eating pretty much just processed junk.
Yeah, it's an issue. Yeah, so that's a message that I run with, and unclear, so on that specific point, whether this generation of kids will have a greater life expectancy than their parents. We're pretty good in medicine with advances in technology and drugs at preventing people from dying. But what we can't do is give them vitality, and they're certainly going to enjoy less vitality. All the trends are bad: rising rates of diabetes, rising rates of obesity. Yeah, so absolutely, there is vegan junk food, and junk food is junk food, whether it's animal-based, plant-based, or a mix of the two. And yeah, it's one of the dangers in this highly polarized society that if you speak sensible, well-informed truth, nobody likes you. Anyway, I understand that space all too well. I spend much of my time there. I think I'm just following the evidence where it leads. I'm not trying to win a popularity contest. I'm saying what I think is true, and the result is, that they hate me from both sides. So it's the cost of speaking truth in the modern world. So be it. Just to add a little bit of nuance, because I completely agree with you. And again, Michael Pollan summed this message up nicely in those 7 words: eat food, not too much, mostly plants. So it's not just that it be plant foods, but it be real food. And of course, that's now been encapsulated with whole food, plant-based. But, I have been invited multiple times to weigh in about the new plant-based meat alternatives, Beyond and Impossible, and what do I think? And I wrote a piece on Medium. Plant-based meat is not a panacea, but I look at food through multiple lenses, and I'm just going to leave one out, although we emphasize it in How to Eat. Mark Bittman, of course, is a fantastic cook and an inveterate foodie, so the pleasure of good food, really, really important. But just leaving that one aside, I'm a physician, so I'm thinking about health. I think direct effects on human health, ethical implications of how we're treating our fellow creatures, because if life is sacred, it pertains not just to human life, but life in general, and how we treat our fellow inhabitants of this world is really important. And then, of course, the impact on the environment, because this is our home and we're not going to have another, and soiling our nest is bad. And so when you look through those 3 lenses at something like Beyond or Impossible, you say, well, in terms of direct human health effects, not really sure. I mean, it all really comes down to instead of what. So if you're eating highly processed plant foods instead of highly processed animal foods, so, for example, a plant-based burger instead of a McDonald's hamburger, probably better. On the other hand, if you're eating highly processed plant food instead of wild salmon, I'm not so sure in terms of direct human health effects. And certainly if you're eating highly processed plant foods instead of, beans and lentils in a salad, it's not as good. But on the other two counts, looking through those other two lenses, obviously no animals need be killed to make the Beyond or Impossible Burger. And the environmental footprint is definitely much smaller than with beef production. So I would say if you're willing to eat plants because you like them, and I'm with you there, that's how I eat. Nearly plant exclusive diet. There's a little bit of allowance for just a bit of dairy, occasional fish and seafood. But I'm vegan most of the time, and my overwhelmingly plant predominant diet and real food, whole food. But what about people who really like meat, but who care about the planet, who really like meat and who care about animals? And they say, I really don't want to give up meat. I really like it. It's a signature part of my diet. But if I could have something that satisfied me, that tasted like it, I would love to reduce the environmental footprint of my diet. I would love to be kinder and gentler to fellow creatures. Well, I think there's a role there. I like to think of these meat alternatives as sort of a gateway drug to whole food plant-based diets. So I think there's a role for them. But fundamentally, what you say is true and important. Vegan junk food is still junk food, and there's a spectrum there. There's ultra processed vegan food, which is pure junk. And then there are meat alternatives, which I think could potentially be, the vegan gateway drug. And I kind of like that.
Yeah, well, it's just so funny. It's almost like sacrilegious to speak against it. I actually got kicked out of a Veg Fest when I was doing it more as a joke. I wasn't even shaming people, but I mentioned that maybe these aren't healthy. And the conference organizer said I had to leave. I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
Well, I'm going to still stick to my guns. That's what I like about your True Health Initiative. If you'd like to talk about that, is because you get people, it's all about agreement. All the physicians that they may have different opinions on certain things, but you got them all to agree on the fundamentals.
Absolutely. And by the way, you need to be a member. We're not just physicians, but culinary experts and sustainability experts and climate experts, but an incredible array of people with a shared interest in public health and the human condition and the fate of the planet. And absolutely, our membership, the council, which is about 500 people, 45 countries, and a who's who in public health, former surgeons general of the United States and deans of schools and chairs of departments and famous names, but ranging from paleo to vegan and everything in between. So there are champions of the Mediterranean diet and champions of the pescatarian diet and champions of the DASH diet and champions of the paleo diet and the vegan diet, but all of them agree a diet that is real food, minimally processed, mostly plants is the way to go for sustainable, healthy people in a modern world with 8 billion hungry Homo sapiens. Even the paleo advocates who think our diet would be best if it were a combination of wild plants and game say, yeah, but we just don't have the acreage for game. By the way, years ago, I wrote a Huffington Post piece on the proposition of the Stone Age diet in the modern world, and I did the math. And so I looked across a range of studies to see how much acreage, square miles really, do you need to make a living as a hunter-gatherer, forager in a traditional way. And I used the average figure I could find. I applied it to the surface area of the Earth and the population at the time, which was 7.8 billion or thereabouts. And we would need 15 times the surface area of the entire planet for this many people to live that way. So that opportunity is foreclosed. So, it's sort of moot. Is that a good way to eat? I mean, there aren't enough bows and arrows and antelopes to go around, so it doesn't matter. So, the enlightened people who've populated the peer-reviewed literature on the paleo diet say we can learn from what our ancestors ate to know something about what we're adapted to in terms of nutrient levels and fiber levels and so forth. But we can't eat the way they did because we're not in the Stone Age anymore. And so we need, maybe there's an advantage to getting more protein. There's some hints from the Stone Age that might be the case. We need to get it from plants. So that means more beans and lentils, not more beef. So yes, there's massive agreement. And I definitely encourage people listening in to visit truehealthinitiative.org. Join us, become a member, get our newsletter, support us. We need you. But you'll find that the notion that no two health experts agree about what diet is best is absolutely false. It often looks that way, AJ, because, if you've spent your life studying the Mediterranean diet and a journalist asks you what diet is best, you're going to say the Mediterranean diet, let me tell you why. And if you spent your life studying a low-fat vegan diet and you're asked what diet is best, you're going to say low-fat vegan. Let me tell you why. But it's sort of the wrong question. What diet is best? Well, the one I like best is. If you ask both of those experts, you ask the paleo expert, the Mediterranean diet expert, the vegan expert, what are the basic principles of a health promoting diet? And they gave 100 answers. 95 of them would be the same. There'd be a 5% divergence. And that's what we were able to capture at the True Health Initiative. That's what we were able to capture at a conference in 2015 in Boston, Old Ways, Common Ground. And that's what the public really needs to understand, is that there is massive agreement. You just never hear about it because it's that 5% that takes up all the airwaves. If you come on the Today Show or Good Morning America, they don't want to hear you say, my views on nutrition are aligned with everybody else who knows what they're talking about. They never invite you back. I know this for sure because I worked for Good Morning America for 2.5 years. That's why I don't still work there, because I wanted to say the same thing again and again. I said, no, you've got to say something different every week. It's much more interesting. I said, yeah, but fruits and vegetables are still good for people this week. What am I supposed to do about it? I can't lie. But that's what they want. They want a different diet every week. And this week it's, some new cockamamie diet that's the best way to eat. And it's exactly the opposite of what we told you last week. And tune in next week to get yet another answer. That's all nonsense. But it's all that ever gets air. And the reality is, there's 95% confluence on what's true. And we certainly highlight that in How to Eat, but it's the organizational mission of the True Health Initiative to make that common knowledge.
That's great. And I posted the link, so everybody check that out and join if you can and support Dr. Katz's work. So you said that maybe not every expert agrees on what diet is best, but don't they at least agree on what diet is worst, like one made up of processed food, or perhaps even the keto diet, which I remember when I interviewed Dr. Walt Willett, he said is a very selfish and unsustainable diet.
Totally agree. Yeah. And Walter's a dear friend. I've often thought that, I love Walter like a father. I love my own father, but Walter's he's a very close second. He's a wonderful guy. He's such a good human. You started out by saying I'm a good human, and I don't think there's a better thing to be than that. Walter is, in addition to being an unbelievable scholar with incredible, just volumes of contribution to understanding about nutrition, such a good human. Yeah, I agree. Absolutely selfish, ridiculous. But no, sadly, whether we're talking about the best diet or the worst diet, you can't get everybody to agree about a narrowly defined diet that's best or worst, because, there are fierce advocates for the keto diet. And, they would definitely disagree. Now, I guess the issue is, did they qualify as experts? Well, some of them think they do. Most of the people that I consider legitimate experts, who don't really have a dog in the fight, who aren't all about, I want one diet to win because it's my branded iconic diet. And there's a bit of that in the mix too. I think we would agree that, any diet made up of processed food, processed plant food, processed animal food, in particular processed animal food. So processed meat is probably the worst of the worst. You combine, so again, as I said at the start, there are these two gradients. There's ultra processed to completely unprocessed. There's animal food to plant food. The best diets focus on the combination of minimally processed and plant predominant. If you combine animal food and ultra processed, which you get with processed meat, you get the worst of the worst. So you could argue that, there's agreement there, but there's some dissent, but the fundamental principles that diets should emphasize: less processing of food. Food should be closer to nature, and should be plant predominant. There's certainly an overwhelming consensus there. By the way, I played various roles at Yale for the better part of 30 years. In particular, founded the Prevention Research Center, which I ran for 21 years. And I left last October to run my own company, Diet ID. We've reinvented dietary assessment and tracking. It's a really cool innovation. So you can visit dietid.com to learn more. But what we've done there as kind of the foundational element that lets us deliver our behavioral navigation platform, we've mapped the diets of the United States, and we've done that by type and quality. So we have 15 types of diets ranging from paleo and low carb to vegan and everything in between. And then they're all stratified by 10 tiers of objectively measured quality using the Healthy Eating Index 2015, which is arguably the best measure in the world of diet quality, correlated directly with all-cause mortality, total risk of chronic disease. And so we actually have an objective gradient in diet quality, and we've applied it to all these different diet types. So you can look at our diet map and you can see what defines a good diet, what defines a bad diet. And yes, it is largely supported by the global consensus. And it really is these two elements that I just described. The bad diets are highly processed and have a lot more animal foods, but there is a very low quality version of the vegan diet. You know it well because it was your diet for some number of years, where there aren't any animal foods, but it's highly processed. And you move to the high quality diets across the board, there's an emphasis on plants. But the other thing that's perfectly clear is a very strong emphasis on minimally processed foods.
Nice. So I have a fun question about your wonderful book, How to Eat, from Stephanie. She wonders if you and Mark had any disagreements on what the best diet was when you were writing the book.
That is a good question, Stephanie. I'm trying to remember. You know, we sort of had this Talmudic interaction, Mark and I, and the process, by the way, Mark lives at a lovely farm in New York, not too far outside of New York City, but in the countryside. And I went there and they had a guest house, and we basically, you know, we just sort of sequestered ourselves for several days, and we had a recorder going, and you know, he was asking questions much of the time. Periodically, I would ask questions, and we just captured it all. And so, yeah, there was some back and forth where we would debate some particular thing. You know, I recall us having a spirited debate about plant-based meats and our views on that, and, you know, what we think was most important, and what role they would play, and are they good or are they bad. Mark is a very strong proponent of locally grown food. And so, you know, we had a spirited debate on that. And I would, you know, basically channel some other information. Well, yes, generally good. But for example, you know, I've talked to experts like Guy Eschel at Harvard, who says, you know, if what you're interested in is the net impact on the environment, actually, there are foods that are grown in certain places so efficiently that the environmental impact of growing them where they grow best and shipping them is still less than growing them where they don't grow natively. You know, it's much more intensive to grow stuff that doesn't want to grow where you happen to be. So local isn't always best. And so I don't know that there were any actual disagreements because we respect one another too much. We both are perfectly willing to listen and learn. Part of the beauty of the relationship. So, you know, usually we could tell which of us was more expert. And both of us are perfectly happy to be quiet and listen. And by the way, you learn more when you're listening than when you're talking, right? So I loved it when Mark was talking, and I think he liked it when I was talking. So a disagreement was more often a provocation. Okay, defend your point of view and educate me, and either convince me or let me tell you what I think and why. And we always wound up agreeing. It wasn't hard to settle on our consensus because it was a matter of, okay, here's what I think, and here's what I know, and here's what I believe, and here's what I prefer, and here's what you think, and what you know, and what you believe, and what you prefer. Now the question is, you know, who's right on the fact, who knows more? And then if we have a difference in the area of preference, who's more persuasive? And then we carved out common ground. So I don't remember there being any real sticking points, actually.
That's terrific. Could you address the Eat Lancet report? How can we get people to eat 90% less meat? What does that look like? How are they going to go from however much they eat to 10%?
Yeah, so there are lots of different ways to get there. So the Eat Lancet Commission report on people health, and the planet, or people, planet, and health. It's it's a magnum opus, and it really looks at sustainable thresholds. So what we have to do if we're going to provide high quality diets to the global population, so everybody can achieve optimal health through diet, and B, do it in a way that's sustainable so we still have the planet to call home. And yeah, I mean, their recommendation is you look at prevailing levels of meat intake in the modern world that needs to go down by 90%. So there are lots of different ways to do that. Everybody could reduce their meat intake by 90%, or some segment of the population could give up meat completely and others would have room to eat a bit more. In cases where people are reluctant to give up meat, these meat alternatives may play a big role. So, you know, back to that conversation we we're having a little bit ago, this is where I see Beyond, Impossible, and other entries in that space offering something of value. Corn can be used, QUORN, as a meat substitute. TVP, texturized vegetable protein, can be used to imitate meat. So before we had Beyond and Impossible, we had other means of kind of imitating the mouthfeel of meat. And, you know, for people who really love plants and love to make meals out of plants, you don't need those. But for people who say, okay, well, we've got to get to that 90% somehow, and I'm willing to participate in saving the planet, but I want to eat what I like to eat. So, you know, give me something, give me a little something, something, and I'll give you a little something, something. So, you know, I think that's part of the solution. So, you know, I think a lot of people could and should be plant exclusive. I think some people will hold out. I think there is room in a global system of agriculture for some of what's called regenerative ag, where you've got a system that combines crop rotation and animal husbandry to replenish the soil. And that would allow for some level of meat intake. It would be low. But you're right, it's a big move. And I think it involves lots of different tactics. It involves education, so people understand the value proposition. It involves food science innovation, so people who are most reluctant, or so you can sort of have your beef and eat it too, right? You can give up beef and help the planet, but still eat something that bleeds when you bite into it and, you know, makes you feel like you're eating beef. So all good, right? Shifts in supply side, and that, you know, extends all the way to the farm bill and what's subsidized. So we need policy. We need enlightened politicians. So, you know, obviously the people that are involved in this video, probably an enlightened audience. You know, it's one of the perils of what we do, AJ, is inevitably you wind up preaching to the already converted, right? And you know, we want to reach out. So everybody listening, reach out, you know, extend the message out to your network. But the other thing we need to do, we need to express this when we shop. We need to express this when we vote. You know, we really need to be activated citizens and part of a cultural shift that says we care about the science, and the science is telling us very clearly what needs to happen. So, you know, the facts are not open to debate. If we don't reduce meat consumption very considerably, it will feed climate change. It will feed the elevation in the global average temperatures. It will accelerate the melting of the ice caps. It will be the end of the polar bear, and it will disrupt biodiversity. It will be the reason for the next pandemic, by the way, just as it was a big part of the reason for this one, right? Meat eating is the reason we have COVID-19 pandemic. So, you know, there's so many problems that get so much worse if we don't follow the science where it leads. And there are so many threats that get so much better if we do. So education is a key part. But then I think we really do need a very clear action plan. Okay, you've educated me. You have my attention. I want to help. What can I do? Well, you can help with your own practice. You can help by paying it forward. You can help by the way you shop. You can help by the way you vote. You can help by the way you share your opinion in your networks. And then each of us becomes an agent of change. And, you know, this could catch on. And there's a diffusion of innovation. And I think there's a diffusion of illumination too. And I'm hopeful that this message really will prevail. There's so many important reasons to do this, related to our own health, related to the way we treat our fellow creatures, and then per the Eat Lancet report, related to the fate of the planet. So stakes could scarcely be higher.
Thank you. So the Eat Lancet recommends reducing animal consumption by 90%. Is there a similar paper that is recommending to decrease processed food consumption by 90%?
I haven't seen it. And, you know, again, Eat Lancet specifically was looking at the confluence of effects on human health and planetary health, making it singularly important. On the other hand, there certainly are papers that highlight processed food as a particular problem to everything related to, the interface of diet and health. So restraint, portion control, weight control, metabolic health. Kevin Hall at the NIH famously has published studies. I mean, he was sort of the first that did a controlled randomized trial looking at the specific effects of just ultra processing on calorie intake, and finding that if everything else is equal, the foods are the same, you just change the level of processing, that highly processed food causes 500 extra calories a day, which is enough to gain a pound a week, which is enough to gain 50 pounds in a year, and off you go. So yes, there's certainly a literature there. The messaging is a little bit different. We don't have anything that says, if you want to save your health and the planet, eat less processed food. But there is an argument there. So, for example, in her book, Soda Politics, Marion Nestle talked about the production process for Coke and Pepsi. And her estimate was that it takes between 300 and 600 liters of water to produce 1 liter of Coca-Cola in its plastic bottle. About 2/3 of that water is used up in the production process for the Coca-Cola, the other third for the plastic bottle. So we need to be using less plastic for lots of reasons. But the Coca-Cola, so 2/3 of 600, so 400 liters of water to produce 1 liter of Coca-Cola. Now, I think if you share that message with young people and say, look, maybe you're not worried about your weight and maybe you're not worried about getting diabetes. Okay, fine. But that our aquifers are in peril. There are thirsty people in the world. There are places in the United States where people turn on the tap and nothing comes out because the groundwater is all gone. That. Do you want to be the reason why? You could satisfy your thirst with 1 liter of water, or you could dump 399 liters of water out on the ground every time you drink one, which effectively is what you're doing when you drink a Coke or a Pepsi. Do you want to be that person? So, I do think there is a message in the literature, if you look for it, that says you want to save your own health and you want to save the planet, less animal food, less processed food.
Great. I'm glad you mentioned Marion Nestle, because she has a new book coming out and I'll be interviewing her in a couple of months. I also host a summit every year called The Truth About Weight Loss. And I'd love for you to be an expert and talk more in depth about this. But in case you aren't available, would you say that the reason people are getting so much heavier and heavier is the ultra processing of food?
Yeah, well, yes, as a critical element. First of all, thank you. I'd love to participate. I would say the reason people are getting heavier and heavier is because they can. And so, yes, ultra processed food, huge part of the story. And specifically, by the way, let's refer back to Michael Moss, The Extraordinary Science of Addictive Junk Food. So it's not just ultra processed food, it's food designed to make you overeat. Could it be any clearer that that's going to be a weight control problem? It's designed to be a weight control problem. The fatter you get, the fatter the corporate profits get. They love it. America runs on obesity and chronic disease when it isn't running on donuts. So huge part of the problem. But, quite fundamentally, AJ, we are well endowed with native defenses against starvation because that's what threatened us throughout most of evolutionary biology. So, our metabolism is adaptive. We're here because our ancestors lived long enough to make babies. People who don't live long enough to make babies make very poor ancestors. And so, the people who were able to survive in a world where calories were relatively scarce and physical activity demands were high. So we are the beneficiaries of their physiologic adaptations over 2 million years or 6 million years, however far back you want to go. And the result is we're very well defended against starvation. We have no native defenses against caloric excess or the lure of the couch because evolutionary biology didn't require those of us. That's a modern problem. And so everything that makes it easy to overeat and underdo contributes to obesity. And, essentially, 70% of adults in the United States are overweight or obese, more than a third of kids, now close to 40%. The numbers just keep going up. We know what the problem is. We know we could fix it, but we don't. Why? Well, because, frankly, getting heavy is the path of least resistance. It means eating stuff that tastes great and, watching TV on the couch. Why not? So, the difference between us and prior generations is not self-control or willpower. It is the fact that it's now possible to get through your day, work hard, and never do any physical work. And to have constant access to hyperpalatable, willfully addictive junk food that once you get used to it, real food doesn't even taste like food. And by the way, just a quick segue here. Years ago, I introduced the term taste bud rehab and pointed out that there's a lot of literature indicating taste buds are adaptable little fellas. When they can't be with the foods they love, they learn to love the foods they're with. But that works in both directions. So if you get taste buds used to hyper processed food loaded up with food chemicals, added sugar, added salt, high fructose corn syrup, that tastes like food to you. And, you know, so if you're used to crunch berries and you eat an actual berry, you say yuck and spit it out. That's tragic, but it's true. The good news is it works in reverse. You rehabilitate your taste buds by systematically and incrementally shifting to real food. It only takes a matter of weeks before you taste that hyper processed stuff and you spit that out and say, yuck. I can't eat any of that junk. I mean, people often ask me, do you cheat? Do you have indulgences? And so, well, you know, I guess I have indulgences. If my wife, you know, bakes something for dessert, I love it. But, you know, she uses a quarter of the sugar of any traditional recipe, and, you know, it's whole grain flours and that sort of thing. So what qualifies as an indulgence for me, you know, people who are used to eating the way America eats, they wouldn't like it. It wouldn't be sweet enough. It would taste funny. But I feel the same way about junk food. I can't eat the stuff that most people in this country eat. I hate it. It's sickeningly sweet. It's horribly salty. You know, those rare occasions when I've had to do a taste test, I cannot swallow this. I really can't. So everybody has that opportunity. You can learn to love foods that love you back. You really can. And it's the work of just weeks to make those transitions. Really important. So again, you know, this hyper processed food is designed to be hyper palatable, is designed to make you start to reject real food. And the other intrinsic property of highly processed food is by design, by the design of really smart, highly paid executives who get a bonus when they achieve this, it maximizes the calories it takes to feel full. Now, here's the beauty of that scenario. If you eat unprocessed food, it does exactly the opposite. It minimizes the calories it takes to feel full. One of the many virtues of whole food, and there are many, but one of the many virtues is you will reduce the calories it takes to feel full. You do not need to be hungry all the time to control your weight. You do not need to be hungry all the time to be lean. You just need to eat food that fills you up on a healthy number of calories. And that's what real food tends to do. The exact opposite of what ultra processed food does.
You basically told the story of my life. Junk food, being until 43, starting every day with a Coke Slurpee with 8 pumps of vanilla syrup, obese, drinking Dr. Pepper all day. And I did have to go to a place for taste bud rehab. I actually had to go to a place, a live-in place. I went to the Optimum Health Institute and the True North Health Center. But you're right, you can learn to love the foods that love you back, because I always say to people, what you eat today, you crave tomorrow. So whether it's a healthy food or an unhealthy food, we develop taste preferences for what we habitually eat. So
good line. That's a good line. Love food that loves you back, by the way, is the tagline for my wife's recipe site, Cuisinicity. So when she can talk more about that when
yes, I'd love to have your wife on. I was looking at her beautiful website and her recipes. That would be amazing. You know, Dr. Katz, a lot of people are commenting on the extensive bookshelf behind you.
It's real. It's not a Zoom image. This is my home office. I actually built the bookshelves, have read a lot of those books, not every one of them, have written a bunch of them too. And then there are still a few on there that are on my get to this when you can list, which never seems to get any smaller.
I'm so thankful for Audible, because it allows me to, because actually I did read your book, but the Audible really helped because I can put it at 2.0 and just listen really fast while I'm on the spin bike. So that's great. You know, you often quote Mark Bittman's the 7 words that he says: eat foods, mostly plants, not too much. I love that.
Michael Pollan. That's
Michael Pollan. Excuse me. That's right.
Mark and I both quote Michael Pollan.
Michael Pollan. Excuse me. I'm a little nervous interviewing such a superstar.
No, but and honestly, you know, the two people in the world, I think, who know the most about the whole food system are Michael Pollan and Mark Bittman. I mean, you know, they're sort of high level view of how what we eat winds up landing, you know, in our supermarkets and on our plates. I've learned so much from both of them. So yeah, I don't think either of them would object to being mixed up a little bit with the other.
Thank you. So one of the phrases I like, 13 words that I've often quoted before I had even heard of Michael Pollan, and I say this because I'm interviewing Elaine Lane tomorrow. Jack LaLanne often said throughout his life these 13 words: if God made it, eat it. If man made it, don't eat it. And I've sort of tried to live my life by those words. And so the one area that I want to ask you, and I don't, again, I want to be respectful and not be controversial, but I read all your articles on oil, and I don't want to argue whether oil is good or bad. But what I wanted to ask you, because my feeling is why eat a processed food if you can eat the whole food instead? So for example, you probably would recommend people eat whole grains over flour and beets over sugar. So if there is something truly good in olive oil or coconut oil or flax oil, wouldn't it also be in the whole food from which it came? So why not advocate for the nuts, seeds, and avocado where the fiber and nutrients are intact over the oil?
Well, so it's an interesting question, and there are a couple of answers. So first, although there are a lot of nutrients we can put into categories, and you can find these nutrients in an array of foods, there are some nutrients that are very food specific. And there are a number of compounds unique to olives that you don't find anywhere else. Topping that list is a compound called oleocanthal, which has been studied extensively and will be studied a lot more. You know it, by the way, if you have olive oil. If you taste really flavorful, really great olive oil, and it makes you feel like coughing, it's the oleocanthal that makes you feel like coughing. It kind of tickles the back of your throat, and it's highly concentrated in only the extra virgin olive oil, cold pressed, and the best olive oil has the highest concentrations. To my knowledge, oleocanthal is not found in any other food. So, okay, you could eat olives. All right. But nobody eats olives off the tree. They're all cured first because olives off the tree don't taste very good. So now you're talking about, okay, you could eat the whole food, but the only way people tend to eat that food is in a cured version, which is very high in sodium. And the only other place you're ever going to encounter oleocanthal, which has been shown to have beneficial properties on vascular health, seems to have anti-cancer properties, seems to have anti-infectious disease properties. It's really a fascinating moiety. The only other place you're going to find it would be in oil pressed out of the olive. Now, extra virgin olive oil has nothing added to it. It's not the whole food, but it's just, it's squeezed out of the food. So, if you say, okay, well, I could either have olive oil and get oleocanthal or not have olive oil and not get oleocanthal, which is better? So, well, tell me about your diet. Say, well, I eat no processed foods at all. I eat plant.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh, he froze right in the most important question. I hope he can come back. Dr. Katz, if you can hear me, you're frozen right now.
Okay. I can hear you.
Okay, great. You got to it's just like the climactic scene. You said, tell me about your diet. And then that's where it froze.
Okay. Sorry. I'm back now. I'm good.
No, that's okay. It was there was a cliffhanger right there.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So, again, one of the critical questions with regard, tell me if I freeze again. One of the critical questions with regard to diet always is instead of what, right? So, if we're talking about a diet that can be improved, I would argue that given everything we know about extra virgin olive oil, both the fatty acid distribution and these novel antioxidant compounds like oleocanthal, there's a pretty good chance it can improve the quality of your diet. But if you tell me my diet is a wide array of whole vegetables, fruits, grains, beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, and plain water for the most part when I'm thirsty, and so, well, there's nothing broken there. So, and if you love that diet and you don't need olive oil to make it more palatable, I guess you're fine, without it. So you stay the course. But that's the other issue I would raise. So I think there are arguments that, potentially you can append to Jack LaLanne's very good advice. I mean, after all, God didn't make nectarines either. Basically people decided that, I like peaches, but I don't like the fuzz. And so they were hybridized. And there are a number of fruits. I don't know that God made clementines either. And for that matter, all of the fruits and vegetables we consume these days are domesticated versions. They're not truly the natural. We're not eating the wild plants of the Stone Age. These are domesticated cultivars. We made them. in the same way that we turn, wolves into golden doodles and labradoodles and chihuahuas and such. So, I mean, all of that is a blend of nature and the willful manipulations of people. And I don't, I have two dogs. I love them. They're not wolves, and I'm okay with that. So, I think there is an argument to say that appending innovation to, what nature endowed to us is probably okay. More importantly to me is the evidence epidemiologically that among the world's best diets associated with the greatest longevity and the greatest vitality are diets very high in extra virgin olive oil. So, we really have overwhelming evidence. So 2 of the world's 5 blue zones are Mediterranean populations with a high intake of extra virgin olive oil. So, the proof is sort of in the pudding there. If you want to live long and prosper with vitality, that can be part of the formula. We also know, though, that there are blue zones that have a very low total fat intake. So do you need that to thrive? No, it's just a way. It's one of the ways you can do it. The other thing that I would say, and I think this is a really important element, AJ, is that a diet will not do you any good if you're not willing to eat it. And I think the premier argument for the unctuous property of good oil is, for many people, it creates a wider array of highly palatable offerings in any given dietary pattern. And so, if judicious use of a good oil like extra virgin olive oil is going to be the difference between you being willing to eat well or not, then obviously, okay, fine. I mean, talk about greasing the skids. So I think that's part of the argument too.
Well, I thank you for putting it that way. My concern is only just caloric density. Most of the people I work with, like myself, are overweight or obese, as I was, and just having interviewed Barbara Rolls, it's so calorically dense at 4,000 calories a pound. I can't figure out how I would include it in my diet, which I believe is very healthy, and be able to maintain my weight loss.
So good point. On the other hand, I do include it routinely. I weigh about what I weighed when I graduated high school. My weight's never fluctuated. So, overwhelmingly, my diet is whole foods, plants. And yet I have no qualms about dipping my whole grain bread into some extra virgin olive oil or drizzling that over salad of mixed greens, tomatoes, cucumbers, et cetera, et cetera. But, I'm very moderate about the quantities. I don't guzzle it. But it figures in my diet. It figures in my wife's cooking. When you have her on, she'll talk about her use of it. She's French. She was raised in southern France. So, it's just a staple there. And yeah, sure. I mean, if you chug it, you're going to get yourself into trouble. If you use it in a time-honored manner, where it makes a very modest contribution, it enhances palatability, but it's not making a major contribution to your caloric intake. And if overall you're eating real foods, mostly plants that are very satiating, you do fine. So again, I've always argued calories, of course, do count, but counting calories is no way to live. I mean, nobody wants to spend their lives doing that. And I never have. And I literally, weigh something very, very close. I mean, my weight has fluctuated within a pound or two of, where I've always been since I stopped growing vertically. And I've never counted calories, but I've always eaten optimally. I exercise routinely too, because I love it. But I've just eaten optimally, and I eat until I'm full, and then I stop. And so it's not been a problem. And the fact that there's some room in that diet for extra virgin olive oil is not been a problem. I don't know too many people, honestly, who can blame a weight problem on extra virgin olive oil. Now, you sprinkle it over your donuts and your French fries, that's another story. Right. Which is what, I always worried when Americans heard about, the benefits of the Mediterranean diet. They'd say, okay, great. So it's French fries with ketchup and extra virgin olive oil, right? I mean, yeah, that's not so good.
Right. Well, whatever you're doing obviously is work, because you look amazing. Are there any last words you'd like to share with the audience, Dr. Katz, either about your wonderful book, How to Eat, the True Health Initiative, or how we can support you in your work?
Oh, well, that's lovely. So the True Health Initiative is a 501c3 nonprofit. And as I mentioned before, we put out a monthly newsletter. We're publishing new material on our website every week, if not every day. By the way, a lot of it is related to risk reduction during the pandemic. And we promised one another, AJ, we wouldn't talk about COVID. But the one thing to say, is, and it's a silver lining to the pandemic, is all this stuff, all these chronic diseases that are the long-term big issues related to health in America, they change the equation acutely with regard to COVID risk as well. So actually the things that we should all be doing to make ourselves healthy for the long term offer a nearly immediate advantage in terms of reducing the likelihood of a severe bout of this bug if you happen to run into it. So there's an acute benefit as well as the chronic benefit. And at the True Health Initiative, we have a lot of materials talking about the confluence of those two. So visit truehealthinitiative.org. My website, which will tell you more about me and all the different things I do, is davidkatzmd.com. Yeah, I mean, Mark and I would both be delighted if you check out How to Eat, which
Absolutely.
is available. I would say it's in bookstores, but nobody goes to bookstores now. So it's available at all the usual places online.
That's true. You know, a long time ago, you spoke at Century City. I believe it's when you were from the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, and we didn't get to meet them, but you were speaking there. And I'll never forget the breakfast they served to mostly physicians was just nothing that you would eat.
Right. And I've seen that many times. And, you know, again, the importance of us practicing what we preach is obviously important with regard to nutrition as it is with regard to everything else. But again, I think it comes back to that problem where we're so acculturated to junk as a food group that even if you're at a conference where people are talking about eating well, nobody really notices if the breakfast buffet is donuts and bacon. You know, it's just so familiar. People kind of look right past it. Even as they're eating it, they look right past it. That's got to stop. And, you know, that's an argument for being a bit more mindful, thinking about food a bit more and you know, appreciating its significance. But anyway, we all have a job to do because, you know, if we all share this motivation, a passion for advancing the human condition, for protecting the well-being of the creatures who also call this planet home alongside us, and safeguarding the viability of this planet for the next generation and the next and the next, because they deserve it every bit as much as we ever did. The time for decisive action is now. We are overdue, my friends, for some collective outrage. So I hope you'll join me in expressing that.
Well, thank you so much. And as much as you love Michael Pollan's quote, I love one of yours, that there's a big difference between lentils and lollipops.
which all too often gets summarized together as carbohydrate, right? Yeah. So I guess that's an important point we didn't cover. Do not think about defining diet quality with macronutrient thresholds. Think about foods, wholesome foods, sensible assemblies. That's the way to go.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Katz. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Likewise, AJ. Thank you. Take good care.
Bye.